Hello and welcome to Twisted Britain, a podcast on true crime in Britain with a sprinkling of the weird and the macabre. And your hosts are me, Bob Dale.
And me, Nadine Royal. We're a couple of friends who met in the pub and developed a friendship based on our mutual love of booze, podcasts and pub quizzes. We met in the Settle Inn in Stirling, and that's where we record.
This week, however, we're having a departure from the norm, and we have two friends joining us.
Hello, my name's Mark.
And my name's Bethan, and we are the hosts of a podcast called Seeing Red. We take it in turns each week to tell each other about a case that we find interesting. So far on the show, we have gone from the death of Jill Dando to the unexplained sort of mysterious death of Dr. David Kelly, and we've sort of covered fires, scams, heists, all sorts in between.
And we are absolutely delighted to be joining our friends at Twisted Britain for a kind of mega collaboration.
Yeah, and then we're going to do something as well over on ours.
So normally each week on Twisted Britain, we tell a story of something twisted, one long one and one short one, and we decide who goes first.
Based on the flip of a coin. This week, though, we have 4 stories, which we're going to split over the 2 episodes. One will go out as Twisted Britain, and one will go out as Seeing Red. We're still going to flip for the story, though.
Amazing. So Mark, I think, is on short story with us.
So, Mark, you'll be joining me on this episode as I'm doing long story. So, Mark, I'm going to ask you to call heads or tails.
Okay, so heads, I go first.
Okay.
And it's heads.
Unlucky.
Okay, right, okay. Are we ready then?
Let's go.
Okay, so to be brutally attacked in your own home, the one place that you should feel safe is the stuff of nightmares. But to be brutally attacked and then tied to your own bed with no access to food or water for 10 days can only be described as a living hell.
Christ.
Imagine hearing... I know, this is not a good one. This is one of the most brutal that we've covered, actually. So imagine hearing the phone ring, knowing it's inches from your tightly bound hands and feet. Imagine hearing a knock at the door, knowing your cries for help will go unheard because you are simply too weak to shout out for help. Imagine lying in your own feces, waiting, perhaps hoping to die. Imagine finally being rescued, only to die from your injuries less than 24 hours later. This is what happened to 53-year-old Alan Holmes when his living nightmare began on, of all days, Christmas Day in 1995.
Oh, that's even worse.
Merry Christmas.
Hopefully that set you up for a great kind of listen.
Oh my God.
So this is a case that when it was featured on Crime Watch back in February in 1996 was described by Nick Ross, one of the show's presenters, as one of the cruelest crimes the show had ever featured. And by this time, the show had been on the air for well over a decade, and Nick and his colleagues had covered literally hundreds of brutal murders and hundreds of other horrific crimes. So hopefully that kind of puts it in perspective. And I think really Nick absolutely hit the nail on the head when he described this crime as cruel, because what we're going to kind of go on to discuss and cover is absolutely barbaric. To know that one human being could do this to another is really not something you want to be thinking about.
Jesus, you're definitely starting off on a good note there.
This is a brutal.
I've been really strong on this story.
Oh, sorry, I've gone first. This is never good.
Right.
I've listened to Twisted Britain before, haven't you? Thanks for going dark on us.
Absolutely. This is really twisted. So Alan Holmes was described as a quiet, gentle man by those who knew him, and he was born and raised in Northern Ireland, and he'd studied law at Belfast University before moving to the bright lights of London at the age of 21. Around 2 years after moving to London, Alan moved into a flat in Parkway, which is it's one of the main roads in Camden Town, and it was his home for the next 30 years, a home that would one day become his prison, and a home that would ultimately see him carried out of a stretcher from, never to return again.
God.
So Alan worked as what has been described as a garage hand at Kentish Town Police Station, and I think I kind of looked that up. I don't think it's a term we use very often now, but it's somebody who just kind of looks after a fleet of vehicles. So I think he was in charge of kind of minor servicing and repairs, ensuring that the kind of police cars were always roadworthy. And he was definitely highly regarded by his colleagues. I think he'd worked there for about 30 years as well. So very much a man of routine.
A glorified valley.
A glorified valet, absolutely, but one that probably gets his hands a bit dirtier, I would have thought. So definitely not a job I would have wanted to do, being a pen pusher. He was described by DCI John Yates, the officer heading up the murder inquiry, as a man who led a very, very quiet life. He said he didn't drink except perhaps for half a pint at Christmas, and his sister, Susan Yule, described him as a friendly, gentle person. She said he loved poetry and should have been a writer. He was very kind and would have given you the shirt off his back.
Oh, that makes it even worse that he's a nice person.
That's why I've covered off all the nice stuff now, so you'll really feel for him when you hear what happened.
Yeah, I was already feeling for him when he was lying in feces, but yeah.
that was never a good start for him. So on Christmas Day in 1995, Alan had dinner with his friends, the Horgan family, at their home in Isleworth in West London. So Kathy Horgan had met Alan back in the 1970s when they were at university together, and having both moved to London, they'd kept in touch. And you kind of get the impression from all the research I've done, from the Crime Watch reconstruction, which I looked at, you get the impression that she sort of felt sorry for Alan. And, as much as they were friends, one of the reasons she invited him over for Christmas dinner in 95 was because she knew otherwise he would be spending the day on his own.
Oh my God, you're just going to break my heart with this story.
I think I've already done it. It's really tragic, isn't it, already? Already absolutely feel for him. So speaking on the 20th anniversary of Alan's murder, his friend Kathy said she had been haunted by the details of Alan's final days and hours for the past 20 years. Describing that last Christmas that they spent together, she said, "My 4 sons were there and we had a pregnant cat in the house at the time." So that's a bit random. But she said Alan always loved animals. And she said, "I remember talking to him about this cat and he was the biggest softie that you could imagine."
I think if someone's nice to animals as well, that shows they're like a good person, doesn't it?
100%.
I'm not a massive cat lover.
Yeah, and you're a horrible person.
I quite I'm sorry. And if any listeners love cats, just send me some hate mail. It's fine.
Forget the listeners. What about me? I love cats. I can't believe you've said this.
I'm sorry.
Like, actual job is basically looking after animals.
Oops.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Bethan will tell you that I quite often threaten to put her cats in the microwave, which is an absolute joke. But if they misbehave on the record, I say get in the microwave. So of course I would never do that.
The funny thing is, though, is as soon as they come near him, he's like, "Hello," and starts talking to them. So he pretends
It is
he's
true. I do love them, really.
He's a secret cat lover.
I think if I was going to be a cat lover, it would definitely be in secret, that's for sure. So, as I said earlier, this murder was featured on Crime Watch, and during the reconstruction of Alan's final days, they show a photo featuring Alan and the Horgan family around the Christmas dinner table. And it's really sad. You can see them enjoying, this lovely meal, and it would go on to be Alan's last meal, not that he would have known that at the time. And I've always got this kind of thing of, I don't know if I'd say I'm obsessed with it, but when you see like CCTV footage or photos of somebody just before a disaster happens, or they're murdered or something, it just completely freaks me out. And I think I mentioned it with Jill Dando. We'd seen a lot of CCTV of her going about her business on the morning that she was murdered, and I just find it really weird. And the same has to be said for this. A lovely snapshot in time, but hours later, Alan would start this living nightmare.
Yeah, I would say that anytime we look for images after we do any of our stories, and that's that sort of thing when you look at somebody's eyes almost, it kind of brings it home that this isn't just a story, it's a real thing.
Yeah. Absolutely. Like when we were doing that Halloween one and I looked at Vincent Kershaw, little old man Vinny, and it honestly, he just looked so sweet, and he was doing his little shopping. And
so in the photo, it looks like your typical Christmas day, lots of food, people wearing party hats, and just a lovely kind of fun time. And that would have been like any Christmas day up and down the country that year, or indeed any year. So as the festivities drew to a close on that wintry night, Kathy and her husband dropped Alan back at his flat at around midnight. And referring back to the Crime Watch reconstruction once again, it does show them drop Alan just around the corner from his flat, as despite their insistence that they would drop him at his front door, he said, "No, I'm happy to walk a little bit." So they did drop him just around the corner. And Kathy said later on, "I just left him there. I always think about what could have been had we done something differently." Perhaps if he'd spent the night with us, he might still be alive today. So, as I'm sure you guys can imagine, it's absolutely deeply affected her. That was tragic.
Yeah. Well, we've said in past when we've done episodes that actually obviously the main crime in all of these things that we talk about is towards the victim, but the people that are left behind, the families and friends and whatnot, are affected, as much as, if not more so.
Yeah, and they have to suffer for like the rest of their lives with the knowledge of what happened and stuff. It's just terrible.
Yeah, and I think that can be a living hell. That can almost be worse than, being the victim of an awful crime. I think you're absolutely right. So despite being dropped off around the corner, Alan did make it home that night. However, what happened in the intervening 10 days is unclear. Due to the state Alan was in when the police finally found him, he was unable, unfortunately, to give a coherent statement. What we do know is that Alan was tied to his bed that night on Christmas Day night, so tightly that his circulation was cut off, causing him to develop blood clots that would ultimately, along with severe dehydration, be listed on his death certificate as his cause of death.
Holy shit.
Sorry, guys, it's so brutal.
I've only finished 1 pint, Mark. Come on now.
This is definitely a minimum of a 2-pinter before we even get going.
That's okay. I've had like 4 drinks. I'm ahead. We're good.
That's good.
At least you're not doing this on that actual Christmas episode, because I think it would just everyone would just be sad.
See, I love doing a special and a theme, and I could have easily done that. I did think about it, but I don't know. I need something a bit more lighthearted for a Christmas one, I think.
We need like a flasher.
Yeah, a flasher, or a light-hearted sex crime again, like the other week. Okay, so
just a light-hearted sex crime.
Not that ever exists. So at 6:50 a.m. on Boxing Day, Alan's bank card was used at the Lloyds Bank ATM on Camden High Street, which was just around the corner from his house. And then the following day at 5:50 p.m., Alan's card was used again in another ATM, this time on Oxford Street in London. And then on the 29th of December, having been tied up now for 3 days, Alan faced the torturous sound of his home phone ringing. If only he could have somehow found a way to knock the receiver onto the floor, he would have been able to cry out for help. But this wasn't possible. And
Sorry,
the phone
Mark, I know
rang
you
off.
said this already, but what date was this?
So on now, it's the 29th of December. So Alan's been...
What year, sorry?
Sorry, yeah, 95.
Oh, so yeah, it's well before your mobile phone, so it would have been the house call.
Yeah. I mean, he may have had a pager. Pagers were probably pretty big then, and a fax machine, but no, nothing else. So unfortunately, Alan was faced with that phone ringing, and he was inches from it, but unable to answer it. So as that phone rang off, Alan would have known that he was one step closer to death. He'd been
That's like real
there.
Psychological torture, huh?
Oh, totally. I think it's, he was beaten up before he was tied to the bed. He's been tied so tightly that his circulation is being stopped. So he's in a lot of physical pain at this time. But I think you're absolutely right, Nadine. I think the mental torture for him at this point would have just been unbearable. So unbeknown to him at the time, the caller was actually his sister, Susan. And with her call going unanswered, Susan wasn't actually concerned because she knew that Alan liked to go out and about quite a bit, and it wasn't unusual that she would phone him and he wouldn't answer. And I think, again, going back to this kind of mental torture for Alan, Alan would have known that an unanswered call or two, or even several unanswered calls to his house, would not have alarmed any of his friends or family. So he knew they weren't going to be coming for him yet. He wasn't due to be back at work until the 2nd of January. This is the 29th of December. So nobody's really going to be missing him at this point.
I would imagine he probably had no idea what the date was as well by the time, days and nights would just blend together when you're tied to your bed.
Yeah, this would have just been one torturous episode. It would have felt like a much longer time period for him as well. So reflecting some months later, Alan's sister would go on to say, just the idea of him suffering when I was trying to contact him seemed so cruel. It's something that will haunt me for the rest of my days. I've lost not only my brother, but my dearest friend. We were so very close. Over the 10-day period that Alan remained tied to his bed, his bank card was used around 10 times at a range of ATMs, but most often at the Shell building on London South Bank. Now, I'd never heard of this building, so I had to look it up, but it's where the oil company Shell have one of their sort of major head offices. So it's a massive office block. I think it's like 26 stories high, and I don't know, but I imagine there's probably kind of shops at the base of it, and there would have been ATMs there as well. But it would have been a building that would have housed thousands of employees, and the vast majority of them would have worked for the oil company Shell at the time. So in total,
just the location of using it. Sorry, just the location of using it doesn't narrow down who it is.
No. But I'm going to come on sort of briefly at the end to one theory, because unfortunately this crime is an unsolved crime, which is absolutely tragic. So in all, for this 10 days of absolute pain and suffering, just under £1,000 was taken from Alan's bank account.
Yeah, but if you think in 1995, that...
I reckon, like, you know, with inflation and everything, that might, even if that's $2,000 in today's money, no amount of money is ever worth somebody's life. But Jesus Christ,
that's true.
This is horrendous. And absolutely.
I'd like to say, well done, Alan, having £2,000 in your bank account around about Christmas.
Yeah, just after Christmas.
Exactly. I mean, does anyone ever have like 1,000 or 2,000 in their bank account? As soon as I get paid, it just goes straight out. Yeah. So on the 4th of January in 1996, so Alan had been in his home now, bound to that bed for 10 days. 2 police officers called round to his flat. He'd failed to turn up for work for the previous 2 days. And that was unlike Alan, because any kind of period of absence or sickness, he would always notify his superiors. So ringing the bell to no avail, the 2 officers, who would most probably have been a colleague of Alan's, they would have been from the local police station.
I forgot about that. The cars.
Yeah, absolutely. So he worked there for 30 years. He was a familiar sight at that police station. They would have all known Alan. So they bashed their way through the main entrance door and then into Alan's flat. And they quickly saw that he was strapped to his bed, fully clothed, but barely alive. And I think that must have just been so difficult for them to process what was unfolding before their eyes. So they called an ambulance, and a barely conscious Alan was taken to the nearest hospital, where very sadly he died at 11 o'clock the following morning. As news of what happened started... Sorry, Bob, go on.
No, I'm just thinking, you can imagine the relief he would have felt having been found.
Yeah, being saved.
And then to not survive that is even more harrowing, not just for him, but like, you imagine the relief his family and everyone would find, go, oh, they've got him now. But
that's shit.
Or for the officers that came in, and they might be thinking, oh, what if we turned up yesterday or something?
Yeah.
I think there's always that, you know, his sister's going to think, what if I'd phoned again a couple of days later and he didn't answer? Maybe I would have gone round to check on him. It's just one of those really difficult things. And part of me does think, you know, Alan had fought this really brave battle for 10 days with this physical and mental torture. When he was finally rescued, maybe that was when he just felt, I don't need to fight anymore. I can give up. I don't know. We'll never know, perhaps, but I did wonder that.
Yeah, it seems reasonable to kind of surmise that, though, that it must take a hugely strong human being to last for 10 days. And then you would just get that rush of relief right through your body.
Yeah, I think that could easily have happened. So as news of what happened started to filter through to his friends and family, the police launched a murder inquiry. Searching Alan's flat for clues, the police found that he'd been burgled, and this was actually believed to be the motive for the murder. So after Alan had been tied to his bed, his flat had been ransacked for valuables, and 2 antique silver photo frames had been stolen, along with Alan's passport and driving licence. And police knew that Alan's card had obviously been taken. It has been used in the ATM on Boxing Day. And although the CCTV around the ATM wasn't very clear, they could tell that the person using his card was not Alan. So police believed that he was tortured for his PIN number. So just when you think it couldn't get any worse, he was tortured as well.
God.
So police appealed for the public's help, and a woman did come forward, and she recalled queuing at an ATM on Oxford Street on that evening of the 27th of December. And that was around the time that Alan's card was being used. And she actually recalls seeing a man in front of her taking 5 or 6 attempts to get the PIN number right. And she said that he didn't really seem bothered. It was taking ages and that a queue was forming. She said he remained calm and eventually he did get his money. And describing this man to the police, she said he was aged between 22 and 25, around 6'1", slim with short black hair. And she said that he was wearing jeans and a grey hoodie and he had sandy coloured Timberland boots on his feet. And when I was reading this bit back to myself earlier, I was like, why did I put Timberland boots on his feet? Where the hell else is he going to be wearing them? But,
it would definitely be a signal if he was wearing them on his hands.
That would most probably be a lot.
That would be why you're getting the PIN number wrong, though. That would make sense.
This is it. I thought, in the interest of clarity, I'm going to say that he was wearing these boots on his feet. So, unfortunately, despite this detailed description, this man was never traced. So with a lack of credible leads, police turned to Crime Watch in February in 1996. And DCI John Yates, the officer heading up the investigation into Alan's murder, said that robbery appeared the only motive for the killing, which I think is quite tragic because you'd probably understand it a bit more if there was some kind of emotional tie
it was like
there.
A revenge attack or something.
Yeah, I could get it a lot more then, but this is just kind of very cold-blooded. So, we're looking at just some kind of psychopath.
They've literally just left him there as well. There's no, they could have.
He didn't even let him go.
Yeah.
Yeah, I suppose the reason they left him there, but then they could have killed him. But the reason they left him there was so that they could continue to use his ATM card because that would have a daily limit on it. So they'd want to max out that, bank balance over a number of days. But as tragic as all this was, they would have been better off just putting him out of his misery straight away.
Definitely.
So DCI Yates said Alan was too ill to give a full statement before he died, as we know. But he added that Alan may have been targeted because he was well known to people in the area. He said, living in London, he saw people begging and sleeping in doorways. He felt very sorry for these people. He may have given them money for soup or given them a blanket, but he did say that actually he wouldn't have let anybody into his flat that he didn't know. So he said he believed Alan's initial cries for help would have gone unheard as the small block of flats Alan lived in was being refurbished at the time, and Alan's flat was the only inhabited flat in the building.
Oh, God.
So there were no neighbours to help or to hear his cries. He revealed some further information and said that he believed a break-in near to Alan's flat on Christmas night may be significant. So as Alan was preparing to leave his friends to head back home, a break-in was reported at Cullen's, which was a supermarket on Camden High Street. Officers arrived on the scene and caught one man, but another escaped. A helicopter was called in with thermal imaging to scan the area, but the burglar wasn't found. And the man that they'd arrested was very quickly ruled out of the murder inquiry, as it was believed that he was just opportunistic. So he'd kind of walked past the supermarket, seen that it had been broken into, and he'd gone in to kind of take some stuff. So he wasn't, a burglar or a serious criminal. So police believe the man who got away may have been the same man that had murdered Alan.
Oh my God, what a little lucky opportunistic thief, though. Oh, I'm going to maybe do a bit of burgling. Oh, someone's broken into Co-op.
But then he gets completely fucked over because very briefly, he's believed to be a murderer. So over the following two...
It's like the most unfortunate series of events that just kind of culminate in this horrific crime, isn't it?
I think it is. It is. So over the following 2 months, a total of 5 men were arrested in connection with Alan's murder. However, all were subsequently released without charge, and Alan's murder remains unsolved to this day. And over the years, the police have, obviously they've conducted fresh appeals. They've offered rewards of up to 25 grand for information leading to a conviction. But this has all been in vain because there's never been a credible line of inquiry. And Alan's ghost is said to haunt Camden Town at Christmas time. And I've made that bit up.
The twisted brain.
It probably does. And as I'm sure you can imagine, what happened to Alan in his final days on Earth will absolutely haunt his friends and loved ones forever. So just sort of briefly reflecting on all of this, his friend Kathy Horgan, who he'd spent Christmas Day with, said, I've got to keep saying to myself that it's over for Alan now. He doesn't have to be in pain anymore, because the idea of him left like that with his hands and wrists tied, I just find excruciatingly awful. She said, I never thought of myself as a vindictive person, but I do think somebody needs to know what they did to him. They should be told. There should be some form of retribution for this person. And she added, it's so important to me that Alan's not forgotten, that at least people remember him. So that's the end of the kind of case. And I just wondered if we could just spend a couple of minutes kind of talking about who the hell we think might have done this. I've got a couple of theories.
I'm glad, like she said, he's not going to be forgotten. I'm glad that we are talking about him.
I feel the same, and we did the same with the Denmark Place fire, which was a horrific event that happened in London and was largely forgotten about. So not that we're a massive podcast, but I just think it's nice to sort of remember these people for who they were, and as I've described, a great guy. So I mean, my kind of thinking with this is, I'm not sure around the motive. Yes, we're looking at robbery, but personally, I think this could be someone that Alan knew. And I also think that it's probably somebody who worked for Shell in 1995, 1996. And I think they worked at that building, and that's why there were a number of cash withdrawals at an ATM there.
That's kind of what I was getting at before. You kind of think if that's where they're going to take the cash out, then you've got to kind of almost close the bubble down to that area. And if they weren't the Shell building itself, if that's the local cash machine, where are the next ones? So you can kind of put a ring around. If they're not using these ones, then and he's using this one, it must be somebody in that area daily.
Yeah, I really think it was. I think you're absolutely right. There's somebody that lived very close to that building, which was actually nowhere near to Alan's home. So somebody that lived very close, or somebody that worked for Shell. And as I said, there would have been, I don't know, probably up to 10,000 people working in that building. I don't know if that's probably a lot, but certainly thousands of people would have worked there. So, it could have been a maniac burglar. It could just be as it appears. It could have been a homeless person. One other theory I did consider was when Alan was dropped back on the Christmas Day evening around midnight, he's quite insistent that he wasn't dropped at his front door. So he was dropped around the corner, and I thought maybe he was going to meet somebody, or maybe he met invite them up to his flat. I don't know. Yeah,
that's interesting, because it would make sense as to why he didn't let them drop him all the way back.
We just don't know. It's one of those awful mysteries, and it's terrible that despite the kind of reappeals for information, nobody's ever come forward with credible information.
So is this still standing as a cold case?
Absolutely, yeah. They said they're not going to close a book on it. It was last featured a couple of years ago in the media, so I think on your key anniversaries, I think it's going to be brought up.
I just think, if it's someone who knows him, I don't know if it's just because I'm not a psychopath, but I just think if it's someone who knows him, would they really leave him like that? So it makes me think it's someone who didn't know him very well.
Yeah. But it could, I mean, not to kind of, say anything bad against Alan, but we don't really know the true Alan. He was very private. Perhaps he was, I'm going to go out on a limb and say this, perhaps he was using rent boys or something. We just don't know.
Surely there was somebody who's not committed a crime before as well, because it's quite an extreme crime to commit once, so it's weird that there's not been another one.
Yeah, that's true. That's very true, yeah.
Which then also perhaps points to someone who knows him, thinks they can get away with it because it's him, maybe.
Surely there must have been fingerprints and stuff, no?
They did. There was DNA evidence obtained, and obviously at the time DNA science wasn't kind of where it was. But when they've done cold case reviews, the evidence just isn't satisfactory. There's not enough for them to kind of get anywhere with it. So that they've certainly looked at it, but unfortunately it's not bared any fruit in terms of moving the investigation forward.
I think I'm probably leaning towards a psychopath that's with a robbery gone wrong. He's maybe seen a building under construction, you know what I mean, or being worked on, and assumed there's nobody, rather than just one person.
And then stumbled across Alan in his little flat.
Then wouldn't they have just killed him?
Well, but maybe that if somebody who's not gone out to kill is like a burglar or whatever, going to piss their pants when it comes to it, and rather than go, I'm not a murderer. leave them there. I don't. That's
like maybe in the hopes that he'll be rescued. Maybe they think he would have been like found sooner. I don't know.
Yeah, that makes sense.
That is a good point, actually. You might think, I'll just leave him there tied up because someone will see him tomorrow.
So I would say at this point, we'd love to know what you as a listener think about this crime and what could have happened to Alan, who may have done this. So as ever, you can reach out to us through social media, whether that's through Twisted Britain or Seeing Red. Just get in touch with us. We'd love to know what you think.
It'd be interesting to hear some more theories.
Yeah, because we're going to keep an eye on each other's social media pages after this, because we're all four of us even intrigued by this. I'm used to saying both, but here we are.
No worries.
That was really cool, Mark.
That was really good. I mean, go big or go home. You kind of came in and blew us out the water there with that one, but
pretty rough one, isn't it? Yeah, I really felt for him.
Well, thanks very much, Mark. That was amazing.
No problem.
Shall we pause and get a drink?
Do you want to refill your wine glasses and we'll refill our pints and come back to you?
Okay, cool. Yeah, thank you.
Ho there, stranger. I have a question for you, if I may be so bold. Do you love fantasy? With its heroes of goodness and knights of daring do? Hearty dwarves and mystical elves, incredible dragons who rule the skies and breathe fire, maidens so fair they make the gods themselves weep at their beauty. You do? Well, never mind, then off you go. But if you like darkness, disparity, blood and gore, necromancy and demons, then I have a tale for you, my friend. For in the world of Aetheran, there is but a glimmer of light amongst the coming shadow. The eternal darkness is spreading its influence from the world beyond, seeking to wash over the land like a dark tide. All is doomed. But there is still hope. A candle burns within the gloom for those that seek to walk within the light. The Knights of the Argent Order, warriors and wielders of magic, trained solely in the arts of demonic eradication. These brave few will battle to the last in hopes of securing a future for all mankind. Be steadfast, be stoic, remain vigilant, for here, death awaits all in the world of Aetheran.
Available on all podcasting platforms, including Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Castbox, and Spotify. Search Dark Saga Aetheran to subscribe now.
So that's us, drinks refreshed, and we're back and ready. It's my turn now. And since I'm on Long Story, and I thought since we're doing this special episode with you guys, I would look up a crime that involved something red.
Oh, we love that.
So I am doing the story, and hopefully you've not heard it, of the Red Barn murders.
No.
Oh, it rings a bell, but I don't know.
Red Barn murders are the story of how a ghost helped reveal the crime that had left her murdered and buried.
I'm so on board for this already.
It's either that or a load of rubbish as a cover-up, but we'll get to that in a bit. On the night of May 18th, 1827, Maria Martin left the house to meet her lover, William Corder, in the Red Barn in Polstead in Suffolk. They had done this many times. However, this would be the last time anyone would see her alive. Maria Martin was born in 1801 and was the daughter of a local mole catcher.
Sorry.
Apparently that was a real job. By all accounts, she was an attractive young woman and attracted the attention of a gaggle of local lads.
Quite often, though, you think they're attractive and they're not very attractive.
Well, yeah, I did look, and I'm going on what it said online that she was attractive rather than the picture, but let's not cast doubts on her. She had, however, by the time she was 24, had 2 children to 2 different men. Unfortunately, the first child didn't survive. The second child, Thomas, was born to a man who was of the kind of local landed gentry. his father Peter didn't stay with Maria, but did regularly send money to help with the support and upbringing of the child.
Well, that's something.
Well, yeah, I think it was, from what I read, it was almost like he felt he should to keep her quiet more than anything.
Okay.
So he seemed a nice guy at the time, but, it was £5 every quarter he sent, which in 1800s would have been a lot of money. However, in 1826, Maria struck up a relationship with another local lad, William Corder, who was actually the brother of the father of the first child who had died.
This is like EastEnders or something.
Oh, okay. Right.
Stuff, isn't it? William was the son of a local well-off farmer who had a red barn. William had a reputation locally as being a bit of an unsavoury character. He'd been caught with a string of petty thefts to his name, including selling some of his father's livestock and passing off forged cheques. But he was also known as a bit of a ladies' man. After forging the cheques and the stealing of the pigs from his father, he was sent to London, disgraced from the family, under orders to join the Merchant Navy. He failed the physical, so he never made it into the Merchant Navy, and was eventually, about a year later, called back to Polstead after his brother Thomas, who was the father of Maria's first child, had drowned in a pond.
Ooh.
The next year saw William lose his father and other two brothers, leaving him as the only one to run the farm with his mother. William at this point had kind of been trying to keep his relationship with Maria a bit of a secret because he didn't want to be associated with her because she was a bit of a floozy around town.
She sounds like a bit of a flag.
I was going to say, Mark hasn't called her a slag.
I was going with
sounds like she likes a bit of a naughty boy as well. A little bit of a bad man.
Yeah, she definitely did. She wasn't so keen to keep it quiet, but William thought, we'll just keep this relationship on the down low. But as time passed, Maria became pregnant with a child to him. So he, rather than trying to keep it a secret, started to become a bit obsessed with the idea of marrying her. Unfortunately, the child that they had together only survived about 2 weeks. There's some kind of speculation that he was killed by William, but there's no proof of what happened to the child. There's actually no proof of the child being buried anywhere kind of legally, but he was buried in secret by Maria and William.
And I suppose that kind of thing was more normal, like 100 odd years ago. You would definitely kind of have that, wouldn't you?
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
Maria, after this, was still very keen to marry William, and he seemed at first fine to do that, but rumours surfaced that the local parish officers were seeking to arrest Maria for having illegitimate children, which, believe it or not, at this time was punishable by a public whipping.
Oh my God.
Christ.
So they made plans to run away together to Ipswich to marry. And on the Friday, the 18th of May, 1827, William appeared at the Marstons' house and in front of Maria's stepmother told Maria that they needed to make a quick exit from the town as the authorities had managed to get a warrant for her arrest. Records show that no warrant had actually been gained, so it's kind of unclear whether William was mistaken or just plain lying. So nobody knows whether he was... He had that kind of feel of being a bit of a let's do what I say.
Sorry, just rewinding to the fact that if you had illegitimate children, you got punished by whipping. If that was like, this is an awful thing to say, but if that was still instated, I think there'd be a lot less, like underage pregnancy issues and stuff. I don't want to get.
It could be something. Could be something we could bring back.
I mean, why not?
Yeah. I am not being part of the campaign for public whipping. So yeah, he had made all these statements in front of Maria's stepmother, Anna. And because of all the statements that he'd made about the warrant being out for her arrest and everything, she'd kind of got a bit scared about leaving during daylight hours. So they made a plan to meet at the Red Barn later that night. So Maria, for the rest of the day, dressed in men's clothing so not to stand out to disguise her appearance, and he would gather everything they'd need and meet her at the barn later on. The couple met as arranged, but no one ever saw Maria again.
Well, or did they? She was dressed as a man. Hard to tell.
I think from what I read, she was dressed in one of his suits. So I don't.
Pretty good disguise.
Maybe she had a mustache on, the whole lot.
Maybe that's a bit more conspicuous if you're dressed in like some massive suit.
Yeah, there goes that lady in a suit. That doesn't fit her very well.
It made me think earlier of that, like an American teen thing where he's given her his
jacket,
his
and it, like
jacket.
her hands are even about the sleeves.
So later that night, the couple did meet as arranged, and William. They met again in the barn later on that night, and William had said to everyone that Maria had moved on to Ipswich a few days in advance of him while he sorted things out in the town. However, the inquiries got a bit much for William, and he left town quite abruptly. He wrote later to the Marston family, informing them that the couple had happily gotten married and they were now living on the Isle of Wight. He continued to write to them, always with an excuse as to why Maria couldn't write herself. Now, although she was of a reasonably poor family, she could read and write, so there was no reason why she wouldn't have been writing to her parents herself.
Joe, at the same time, though, is that not quite an easy thing to lie about? Like, it's not like you're doing a phone call and you're like, oh, Maria's just out shopping. She can't get him to the phone just now. Like, if you're just writing something, just learn how to forge women's writing.
Yeah, because I sort of think, what kind of excuse could you have for not, for saying, oh, she can't write, she really wants to, but she's like at the shop.
Stealing some
pigs. Yeah, like fucking some local man again.
She broke her hand. I don't know. She can't write.
It's funny. That
Good excuse. She broke her hand.
The excuses he gave in writing to the Marston family were, "I'm sorry, she's ill," and then, "Oh, I'm sorry, she's hurt her hand."
Oh, there you go.
Good. Yeah, well done, Nadine.
Thank you.
And no, she has been writing to you. They must have got lost in the mail.
Yeah.
Why didn't I think of that?
Blame the postman.
Yeah. Thank God for email. You can trace everything.
Bloody now. Royal Mail, honestly.
So this went on for months and months until the point where the Marstons started to get a bit suspicious. And around about this kind of time, Anne, who was Maria's stepmother, told her husband Thomas that she'd been having strange dreams for a couple of months about Maria's murder and that she was buried in the Red Barn.
Oh.
So the following year, in April of 1828, she managed to convince Thomas to go and have a look in the barn.
It took that long to convince him.
So it was about 4 months it took to convince him.
Why has nobody been in the barn for that long?
So right at the spot where Anne had indicated something had happened, they found some kind of disturbed earth, and Thomas drove one of his mole-catching spikes. Now, I googled mole-catching spikes because when I read this, I went, "That's not a thing." Turns out you can still buy mole-catching spikes to these days in prominent DIY stores.
Mark, Bethan, I know what I'm getting you guys for Christmas.
Yes, please. I want one.
Those pesky moles.
So as he drove the spike into the ground, it hit something hard. So he sent for help, and some of the men in the village came around to help him, and 1.5 feet under the ground, they found the decaying remains of Maria Marston.
Oh, why can't we ever have a happy ending?
Sad. That's the thing about true crime, though. It's never happy.
Yeah, good point.
Maria was identified by using some of her clothing and her hair, which was still identifiable.
Her hair?
Well, yeah. So
the style? Or?
I don't think it was because she had pleats in or anything.
I mean, how distinctive is hair? I feel like somebody could cut your hair off and show it to me, and I'd be like, I don't know, it's just hair. I wouldn't be like, oh my God, it's Bob.
You would notice this balding ginger head anywhere. Also, however, around her neck was one of William's green handkerchiefs.
Oh.
The cause of death wasn't pretty hard to determine because of the state of the body when they found it, but it was said she could have been shot, stabbed, or strangled.
They've narrowed that down. Yeah.
So we've narrowed it down to it wasn't poison, and that's about it. However, it was stated at the time that the stab wound could have been the mole spike.
Oh, of course.
William would eventually confess to what happened in the barn, but I'll come back to that in a bit. So the local constable in Polstead set off to find William, which he managed to do so living in London, where he'd married another woman, Mary Moore. And he was randomly the master of a girls' boarding house. So with the help of London police officer James Lee, they managed to arrest William by posing as the father of a daughter looking to seek into the boarding house. Once inside interviewing William about getting his daughter in, he cornered him and arrested him for the murder of Maria. William at this point denied even knowing Maria, never mind anything about her murder. A search of William's house in London found 2 pistols and a whole load of handkerchiefs and things like that matched with the one that they'd found around her neck. He was taken to Suffolk to stand trial at Shire Hall in Bury St Edmunds, where he pled not guilty. However, when we've covered kind of historical crimes in the past, there seems to be quite a common theme that the newspapers would grab hold of stories like this and kind of, not that it doesn't happen anymore, but, you know, they not glorify, but they make a big deal about these things in the press. And the story of the Red Barn had made the press massively, mainly because it had been found due to somebody's dreams and what's the word I'm thinking of?
I don't know.
Like, she was supposed to have had premonitions. She had the sight, you know, and had seen the ghost of Maria to tell her where she'd been buried and all that. So I'm
just calling it she's a witch.
She's a witch.
Yeah.
So it's good paper, because it's like when they say that makes good TV. Like, it was interesting to read, I suppose, if you got nothing else on in the 1810s or whatever.
And I'm not being harsh, but I think, you know, like back then people weren't as intelligent as they are now. So I think when you've got a society that's not very intelligent, they buy into all of that kind of stuff a lot more. So it would have absolutely fed the appetite of the masses. I'm
not being funny. If someone said right now that someone dreamt of it and then they found the body mark, I'd be well up for that. And I think
I'd be right on top of that. I'm with you, Bethan.
Yeah.
We'd be featuring that.
Some of the side information I read on this that I haven't kind of included in the story was that at that time they took that quite seriously, like kind of premonitions and all that kind of stuff, especially if it resulted in a kind of not a conviction, but like some information or some evidence.
Well, yeah, it was a pretty successful premonition.
Well, we'll come back
found
to
the body.
We'll come back to that in a second, because I've got my own wee thoughts on this at the end. So, yeah, like I say, it made the press quite massively, and mainly because the ghost had told Anne where to find her. So, for the funeral of Maria, huge crowds descended on the town, and they were all there to watch her funeral. But at the same time, they tore the Red Barn to pieces.
Oh, shit.
Taking away bits of it as souvenirs to be used as toothpicks.
What?
People used to love souvenirs, didn't they?
Well, they did the same almost with the Berlin Wall when it came down. People just
I don't think anybody used the Berlin Wall as a toothpick, Bob.
Maybe not a toothpick, but there is definitely people scrambling to get bits of it. And in the months after the arrest, there were books and plays written about it. And actually now there is still online that we'll post later on a YouTube video of marionettes, you know, the puppets, reenacting the murder in the Red Barn.
Oh.
And it's
sounds creepy.
It's the most brutal puppet death I've ever seen.
Well, I don't know. That's what puppet shows are all about, isn't it? What's the famous one where the man like caves in the woman's head, the pregnant woman? That's it, Punch and Judy. Yeah, that's pretty brutal too. So
yeah, that's fucked up. Yeah.
Well, this is the Red Barn, Punch and Judy. We'll post it up later on so you guys can see it.
Amazing.
Yeah. So as such, it became quite a sensation. When William was taken to trial, they had to do a ballot of tickets because all the local hotels were full for up to 4 days beforehand. And it had to be moved back several months as they couldn't find a non-prejudicial jury.
Wow.
Eventually, when it came to trial, the judge noted that he had to push his way physically through the courtroom to get to the stand.
Oh my God.
The evidence against William was fairly overwhelming. They brought to the stand Anne, who recalled the meeting that they'd had on the day of her going missing, and that he had lured her to the barn that night. And she also recalled the dreams that she'd had. Maria's brother, who was about 10, recalled seeing William that night with a pickaxe. And her father, Thomas, testified about finding the body in the barn. There's also all the stuff about the lying in the letters and the handkerchief around the neck. And, there's loads and loads of what I would say is circumstantial evidence. There was nothing to pin him there other than the fact that they said they were going there.
And she clearly didn't make it to Ipswich. So him writing those letters...
saying that she's
She's living there, complete bullshit.
So during the court, the suggestive motive was that they'd had an argument about his past criminal life and the suggestions of foul play around the death of their child. William maintained his innocence throughout the entire trial. At the conclusion of the trial, the jury deliberated for nothing more than 35 minutes before finding him guilty of murder.
Shit.
On finding him guilty of murder, the judge ordered him to be hanged and that his body be dissected for medical study.
Ooh.
Like a major, if being hung wasn't punishment enough, we're going to butcher you after as well.
At least it wasn't before.
That's true.
It was apparently quite a common practice at that point because they were looking for cadavers for medical students in universities.
Well, where better to get them than the fucking criminals?
Well, that was quite a common thing. So the judge said on finding him guilty, "You be taken back to the prison from whence you came, and that you be taken from thence on Monday next to a place of execution, and that you shall be hanged by the neck until you are dead, and that your body shall afterwards be dissected, anatomized, and may the Lord God Almighty, and in his infinite goodness, have mercy on your soul."
Bloody hell.
I've also managed to include in that my favourite sentence that any judge could hand out to anybody: "May you be hanged by the neck until you are dead."
You absolutely love that sentence. That's your favourite thing.
It's pretty much what I look for in all of our stories.
You do love a poetic judge, don't you?
I do. I love a quote.
We love a quote. We love a quote.
Yeah.
So after the sentence, he was taken back to jail and had several meetings with the prison chaplain and his wife. After speaking with his wife on several occasions, he decided that he would confess to the murder of Maria, saying on that night that they had been arguing in the barn and he had accidentally shot her in the eye. As she...
Oh my God.
These things
Not
happen.
even funny, but how do you accidentally shoot
That does
someone in
happen,
the eye?
though.
Things
That can
happen, you know.
He made quite a big deal about having never stabbed her. But like I said earlier, that could have been part of the mole spike digging kind of part. There was some bits and pieces about the fact that although it was difficult to decide how she'd been killed, the kind of coroners had said there was more than one stab wound in her, and the most likely case was it was a gunshot followed by a frenzied attack. But I personally didn't get that impression.
What's the need? That's a bit overkill, isn't it?
So I'm putting it down to the mole spike.
I think it's got to be, though.
So sorry to go back to that, but does a mole spike literally stab moles when they're in the ground? Do you just stab the ground and hit a mole?
Yeah,
that's horrible.
Shut up! I don't want to give you guys a mole spike anymore. I thought it was just a spike to dig into their burrows and find them.
It makes a mole kebab.
Oh my God!
Oh my God! Don't give Mark a mole spike.
Mark doesn't need one. He'll use it on your cats.
I know.
I'm already thinking about it, Nadine.
You guys are sick. I'm not giving you a mole spike.
Don't lump me in with him, Jesus.
So on the 11th of August, 1828, thousands and thousands of people, records state between 7,000 and 20,000 people, turned up to see him hanged. He was said to be too weak to stand on his own. However, before the hood was put over his head, he said to the crowd gathered, "I am guilty. My sentence is just. I deserve my fate, and may God have mercy on my soul."
Ooh.
After the standard hanging for an hour, which is apparently what they did, is after you were hung either on long or short drop, they left you on the rope for an hour to make sure you were dead.
Well, that will do it.
He was cut down, and the hangman claimed his trousers and stockings, as it was his right to do so.
What?
The hangman also set up a wee side business at the time, selling bits of the rope to the crowd that were gathered.
Well, better than a toothpick made out of a barn, am I right?
So the body, after it was cut down, was taken back to Shire Hall, where it was cut open along the abdomen to expose the muscles. It was then left there for the crowds to view, and by the evening of that day, over 5,000 people had queued to see the body.
I'm sorry, but that's not medical purposes.
No, but
no.
It was.
Do you know what though? When you've not got the internet or TV, this was entertainment.
Yeah, the height of it, wasn't it? Who doesn't want to go down and see the muscles of somebody splayed out in the town centre, you know?
So I watched a couple of YouTube videos about this crime, and there's a couple of other podcasts that have covered it, but nothing particularly in depth because it's quite weird. But one of the other, I think it was one other podcast that I listened to, and we'll put a link up to it when I find what it was. Basically said that it was a case of that was what the public did. You know, when there was an execution there, people gathered to watch it, and then they wanted to see the dead body afterwards. But I'm with you guys. I don't think I could bring myself to go and see a public
I don't
execution.
know. I'd maybe go. Just one.
It depends on what they did, because if they were really nasty, I think I might go.
Yeah, Beth and me and you will go. Let's leave the men at home.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not going.
They can stay in the pub. We'll go see the dead body that's been hung.
That sounds absolutely perfect to me. So after the 5,000 people had trooped past his body, their body was moved to Cambridge University, where it was dissected and a post-mortem was carried out by university students and physicians in front of a gallery of the public. During this time, experiments were carried out in the body to learn pretty much a lot of how the body worked. So they did things like attaching batteries to the muscles to watch them spasm.
Whoa.
William was also skinned, and parts of his skin was tanned and used to cover a book that contained an account of the murder.
Oh my god, that's poetic. It's the most poetic thing I think I've ever heard.
Would you like one for Christmas?
Of my own skin? No.
Yeah.
I'll have it.
There's also
You're a freak.
No.
Yes, she is. There's also other parts of the body that were kept. So the scalp of William Corder was kept and is still in a museum to this day.
Why the scalp of all things?
But on the scalp is still his ear and some of the stubble of where his hair would have been.
Oh, gross.
His skeleton was skinned and dried and used as a teaching tool and was kept in the Royal College of Surgeons until 2004. When it was removed and cremated. It was quite common practice, I think, to use real skeletons as teaching tools.
They've got real ones up at the uni, like at Stirling Uni, animal ones. I've seen like a whole horse skeleton. It's pretty gnarly.
Wow.
But for it to have been kept there till 2004, when he was hung in 1827,
that's pretty cool.
Is a long time for it to be there.
I don't know. Do you know what? At least like something good came out of it. He might have been a shit and done something awful, but they taught some future doctors or whatever they were. It's
true.
Good science.
So,
but in a way, I sort of think all of that has probably led to, the notoriety of the case and the fact that 180 years later, we're discussing it nearly 200 years later. So it's weird, what was kind of done to kind of help the wider community has probably resulted in us kind of focusing on him, which it's entertaining, but yeah, it's weird, isn't it?
Yeah.
So before I sign off here, there are a few rumours that kind of go with this case, and I want to touch on one of them because it's the one that kind of I go... Now, between Nadine and I, there's one of us that believes in ghosts.
I wonder who that is.
And then there's me. So I'm going to put it here that Anne, whose dreams revealed the place where the body was... Well, here's a wee thing about Anne. She was only actually a year older than Maria. And although she was her stepmother and married to her, obviously her older father, she was of the area as well. And it's speculated that she had also had involvement with William.
Oh,
and
just another slag.
Just another slag. So the two of them had planned to dispose of her together. And
yeah.
To
but then
me,
why did she go to Ipswich with him then?
Yeah, and why is she like calling him out on writing bullshit letters and stuff?
Because her dreams only started 2 days after he married another woman.
Oh,
yeah.
I smell jealousy.
Yeah.
Oh my god, what was up with these people in their little fucking barn, shagging each other's wives? Jesus.
Small town ways. So that's a kind of brief kind of story of the Red Barn murders. There's other bits and pieces about how the families were actually intertwined together and all that kind of stuff. But actually, personally, what I feel it boils down to, and this is my opinion, is that William was just a bit of a player and got caught up. And
messed with the wrong bitches.
Yeah, messed with the wrong bitches and had to shoot one of them in the eye.
Yeah, it happens.
Accidentally.
The quote I read about it was he accidentally pulled his pistol from his velour coat and shot her in the eye.
Oh,
fancy,
you know what?
fancy.
I think I'd fancy him if he was wearing a velour coat.
Easily swayed.
If you were out about like 200 years ago, you'd have been one of them sluts.
I'd have been such a slut, and I'd be slutting it up in the Red Barn.
In those barns.
I'm glad that my husband doesn't listen to the podcast.
Do you know what, Bethan? I would have joined you, then probably got jealous when our man went off and married somebody else and accidentally spiked you with a mole spike. So.
Oh shit! Yeah.
Oh, that was really good, Bob. Thanks.
Oh, you're welcome. Yeah, it was. I looked for something red, like I said, and I thought, well,
we love that.
That's really good.
So yeah, we're just going to go and do our normal sign off here, where we say thank you very much, everybody, for listening,
and most of all, thank you for joining us, Bethan and Mark.
You're welcome. Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us. We've enjoyed it.
It's been more than a pleasure. You can find both Twisted Britain and Seeing Red on social media, but we'll finish with, I hope you liked our special crossover Twisted Britain episode, and I hope you enjoy our Seeing Red crossover at some point.
Yeah, come and join us at Seeing Red.
Thanks for having us, guys.
Bye.
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 Bye.